legacy of the Shrek franchise is a bizarre one. What started off as a parody of Disney movies soon became the biggest animated franchise of its time, propelling DreamWorks as a force to be reckoned with in the film industry. However, just like many movie empires, the Shrek series would eventually fall from popularity. Between the Shrek brand becoming a corporate sellout, an internet meme, and being scapegoated as the cause of the worst trends in animated movies of the 2010s, its reputation seemed to have hit rock bottom. However, in recent years, many people had been revisiting the franchise and discovering why it was so successful in the first place. And so, one by one, I'll be tackling all of the Shrek movies. Starting off with the first one, of course. Released back in 2001, the movie takes place in a world full of fairy tale creatures. The plot follows Shrek, an ogre who lives in solitude, due to mobs of angry villagers constantly terrorizing him. However, everything changes when his land gets invaded by various fairy tale creatures, who are exiled there by Lord Farquaad. And so Shrek makes a deal with Farquaad to rescue Princess Fiona for him, in exchange for getting his land back. And so Shrek, with the help of Donkey, goes on a quest to rescue Princess Fiona from the Dragon's Keep. However, things become more complicated afterwards when Shrek and Fiona start to fall for one another. And furthermore, it is later revealed that Fiona has a curse that turns her into an ogre every night. A major aspect of this movie is satirizing old school Disney princess movie tropes, along with all the fairy tales and nursery rhymes we all know. What's interesting is that during the Disney Renaissance in the 90s, several animation studios tried to replicate their success by copying their formula, but that strategy failed. But then Shrek came along, and instead of copying the common tropes of Disney, it made fun of them. While this wouldn't be anything special if it came out nowadays, considering that everything has to be meta and a deconstruction of a genre. However, it cannot be stressed enough how impactful this was way back in the early 2000s. Plus, Shrek doesn't simply point out the cliches and tropes lazily and call it a day. Instead, it was very clever in how it used meta humor. One of the best examples is when Shrek and Donkey are about to stop Fiona and Lord Farquaad's wedding in the climax, only for Donkey to insist that they had to come in at the "if anyone objects" line, solely because that's how the trope works. But they don't stop the joke there, as Donkey struggles to find out if the line had already been said yet, and eventually Shrek gets frustrated and gives up and just barges in. Funny how Shrek is the go-to example of the stopping the wedding trope nowadays.
Buckle up, Millie, we're doing a Shrek.
Despite the fact that I was actually making fun of it, there are numerous clever twists on all the familiar fairy tale conventions throughout the movie that don't come across as a lazy attempt to get a cheap reaction out of the audience. Aside from the parody angle, a lot of the movie's humor comes from the various comedic exchanges between the characters with witty dialogue. Aside from jokes, Shrek also uses meta commentary to tell a meaningful story about people who are normally viewed as nothing but monsters in fairy tales, even when that's not the case, and believing that they can have a happily ever after. But then they not only learn that they too deserve to find love, but also learn to love themselves, regardless of how the world sees them. This is perfectly illustrated by the opening and closing scenes, where the movie starts off with a storybook opening, just like in an old school Disney film, only for it to be cut off with Shrek ripping a page out of it, and mocking the very idea of the fairy tale ending. However, at the end when Shrek gets his happily ever after, the movie closes off with a storybook ending. In short, Shrek went from parodying fairy tales to becoming its own one. And now it's time to talk about the ogre himself, Shrek. While at first glance, Shrek may come across as grouchy, but as he famously stated in a certain scene in this movie, there are more layers to his character. He isn't constantly cranky, as he cracks jokes throughout the whole movie.
Sure, it's big enough, but look at the location.
And he only acts like a monster when he wants to scare off people who disturb his peace. There's an important moment where Shrek makes a deal with Farquaad to rescue Princess Fiona for him, and Donkey questions this, pointing out that he's an ogre, so he could easily just threaten to terrorize Farquaad's kingdom in order to force him to give him his swamp back. However, while Shrek is an ogre, he isn't an all-out brute, and he is willing to take the high road. And throughout the movie, there's some great exploration to his character, such as the stargazing scene, where after some prodding from Donkey, Shrek opens up about how society unfairly judges him as an ugly monster, and how no one is willing to get to know him, which leaves him understandably jaded, and believing that it's best to close himself off from the world. But from there, Shrek goes through a personal journey of learning to open up to others, chubbas, along with finding his happily ever after regardless of how he's perceived by the world. And of course, where would an ogre be without his noble steed? So now it's time to discuss Donkey. There are many annoying comedic sidekicks from animated movies, but there are a few things that separates Donkey from the rest of the pack. 1. He's actually funny, and 2. He plays a vital role in the story, rather than being relegated to being a nuisance. He is Shrek's first real friend, being the first person who doesn't discriminate against him for being an ogre.
I'm an ogre! Doesn't that bother you?
Nope.
Really?
And instead taking the time to get to know him. Then there's Princess Fiona, and the way she and Shrek parallel each other in this movie is fascinating. She starts off as a princess, and while unlike Shrek, she believes in true love, she also has the mindset that she can't have a happily ever after, as long as she becomes an ogre every night, and was willing to marry someone who doesn't truly love her, believing that'll end her curse, which will allow her to finally meet the expectations of what a princess should be.
That's why I have to marry Lord Farquaad tomorrow before the sun sets and he sees me. I'm a princess, and this is not how a princess is meant to look.
However, after overhearing Shrek opening up about how the world treats him, and feeling that connection with him, she starts showing off her true self, which is more like an ogre than a princess, allowing her and Shrek to bond. And just like Shrek, she wants to love herself regardless of who or what she is, and chooses to be with him. And the last major character is Lord Farquaad. Although he doesn't have that much of a presence in the movie, as he's mostly just there as a plot device. First by dumping the fairy tale creatures on Shrek's swamp, and then being an obstacle in Shrek and Fiona's romance in the third act. But he's also quite funny, so he gets a pass.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, is this not the most perfect kingdom of them all?
Well, technically you're not a king.
Thelonious.
Aside from the characters, another integral aspect of this movie is its song choices. Since this film, many other animated movies use mainstream songs as part of their soundtrack. However, the filmmakers of them seem to have missed why the song Shrek News fits so well in the movie, as usually they just throw in whatever is popular in order to draw in audiences. Shrek, however, picks specific songs that serve a thematic purpose to the scenes they're played in. There's of course the episode iconic All Star by Smash Mouth, which was the perfect way to showcase the contrast in tones between this film and the Disney movies that audiences were used to up to this point. As for the other songs, they have lyrics and music that match so perfectly with the scene they're used in, you'd swear they were originally written for this movie, especially Smash Mouth's cover of I'm a Believer, that's played at the ending where Shrek and Fiona get married. I thought love was only true in fairy tales, meant for someone else but not for me. Perfectly summarizes Shrek's perspective at the beginning of the movie, while, and then I saw her face, and now I'm a Believer, represents how both his and Fiona's life had changed for the better, since they fell in love with each other. As for the flaws of this film, while the animation is great overall, with this being a computer animated film in the early 2000s, there are understandably a few areas that show its age, with some of the character models looking uncanny. There's also another glaring issue that hinders on the film's enjoyability, that being the third act breakup. While I guess it makes sense for this to happen, for the story the movie is trying to tell, the fact that it's done via the most generic use of the misunderstanding trope is incredibly bothersome. Even though this movie makes fun of all the fairy tale cliches, it for some reason prays out the romantic comedy ones pretty straight. Okay, now that I'm done with the negative points in this movie, it is time to discuss one of its best aspects, that being subversion utilized to perfection, to create a powerful resolution to the story. In the scene where we first learn about Fiona's curse, she mentions how true love's form will show at true love's first kiss. Now initially, Fiona and by extension the audience, assumed that this will mean she'll no longer turn into an ogre. However, when Shrek and Fiona have their first kiss, she instead remains an ogre. However, this isn't because the kiss didn't work, but because this is true love's form. This is because, as mentioned before, Fiona is being her true self as an ogre, and she and Shrek fell for each other as ogres. So this is a perfect representation for their true love for each other, regardless of what the world might think.
But I don't understand. I'm supposed to be beautiful.
But you are beautiful.
Now, as much as I love Disney's Beauty and the Beast, its beauty is within message is kind of hindered by both Belle and Beast being beautiful at the end of that movie. But Shrek and Fiona both being ogres, who are considered to be ugly monsters by society, at the end is a far better example of loving someone for who they are, regardless of how they look. Let's be real, Disney would consider this sort of ending to be too risky. However, this was the perfect way to cap off Shrek's story. As I mentioned earlier in the video, there are people who blame this movie for the corporate state of animation nowadays, with many aspects from it such as the use of pop songs, a dance party ending, and pop culture references, becoming over news in many other animated movies that came after it, due to it becoming so successful. Plus they felt that more dramatic and artistic hand-drawn animated films were robbed, resulting in a negative direction for the industry. However, I believe it's unfair to criticize Shrek for this, as it has utilized all of these elements exceptionally well. Thus, it rightfully deserved all of its success. It's more the fault of corporate executives, who milk all those trends solely because of Shrek's popularity, without understanding why they work so well in that movie. Sure, I wish films like The Prince of Egypt and Treasure Planet received the mainstream attention they deserved, and in an ideal world, we'd had a perfect balance of movies being influenced by them as well as Shrek. But at the end of the day, we can't control the box office, and there's nothing we can do to change the course of the animation industry took after Shrek. However, that doesn't change the fact that it was a genuinely good movie. And that was my video on Shrek. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to give it a like, share, and comment. Also, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell for notifications. And if you are interested in supporting my channel, then head over to my Patreon. Well, I got nothing else to say, so see ya!